This is the point. I do have a video that I want to share. I'm going to try to do this. I'm just going to share this as I talk, um, and ask if, well, I'll go ahead and start it, and maybe some of you can recognize what this is. This video reminds me of a time that I was out at the beach some years ago, not unlike what Khalil Gibran and Elizabeth Tarbuck wrote about, marveling at the intersection of the ocean and the land and the rivers and our lives. And off the distance, I saw what I thought at first was a puff of smoke appearing and disappearing in the air. And I watched it, and several times as I got closer, I saw that it was actually a whole slew of sandpipers. That were flying in formation, turning and spinning and changing direction almost spontaneously. And I was to learn later that this was, when it's done by starlings, as this video shows, it's called a murmuration. And I've always been amazed at these kinds of formations since then. When I see them online, when I see them in person, and I've seen them, I remember seeing a school of fish at the Monterey Bay Aquarium one time, that fish can move in the same kind of entire, hundreds of them at a time can move in almost lockstep fashion. I'm sometimes amazed by, often always amazed when I see something like that, about the power and the decision-making capability that each individual bird must have. And I've read a little bit about murmurations when they're formed like that, and how thousands of birds can, within microseconds of one another, make the same decision to turn and fly in a different direction, or to follow a new leader. That there is not one leader in a murmuration, but is almost a spontaneous collection of like they're part of a higher consciousness of some point when they're together. And this, I think, forms a wonderful metaphor for the kind of living that we need to engage in this time, that we don't see a flight plan ahead of us. I don't think any one of those birds in there had a flight plan in his or her head. They knew that they were flying, and they had to make decisions once they were in the air, and they didn't know which way they were going to go next, but they just went the way that they needed to go to benefit the entire flock. And that's what I think is essentially what we're being asked to do in this age of coronavirus. And it actually is much more than coronavirus too. It's a way of being in the world that is very old, but is oftentimes not enhanced and held up by our culture. That's why I think we do have people now who are questioning the science of this coronavirus pandemic, just like people question the science of climate change and that kind of thing, because they look at the world in a one particular way that they were taught. And all of us were taught to do this to some extent. We're all individual beings with our own free will, and we make decisions based on our own criteria. And that does follow in many times. And furthermore, many people believe that when everybody is allowed to make these decisions to benefit themselves and their own self-interest, that the good of society follows. And that is an old principle, and I think has a lot of validity in our world, but it doesn't explain everything, and not always in all situations is it the best thing. And people pursuing their own self-interest does not always lead to the greatest good. It's kind of like, I was in a conversation with someone recently and comparing this worldview, this individual decision-making based on our own self-interest worldview, to be kind of like Newton's laws of physics that explain maybe 90% or 95% of the observable of motions of bodies in the observable universe. But when you really get into the detail and start looking at small scale or very large scale, but suddenly those laws of motion that are so solid become apparently their shortcomings become become apparent. So people who are stuck in this individualistic worldview, they can't see a murmuration like that and see it for what it really is. They probably believe that there is one bird in that whole flock that's actually calling the shots, and they're responding to orders issued by somebody else, and whether it's some kind of authoritarian government or whoever, they feel like that. They don't see that, no, it's not that there's one person controlling the whole flock or one bird controlling the whole flock, but it's all of them working together in some kind of expanded consciousness where they can operate and they can function as the flock. So no, there is not any one person in charge in this time, and in many ways in our lives, there can't be one person. We have to be comfortable living with the uncertainty that we just don't know exactly when we're going to be able to go back to work. We don't know exactly when the stores are going to be open again. We don't know exactly when it's going to be safe for us to gather in church community again and to join hands and hug our neighbors and all these things that are so dear to so many of us that we don't know for sure when that's going to happen. And yet we have to find peace with the reality that we just aren't going to know unless, and the only way we can know is to pay attention to what's going on around us, pay attention to what our fellow birds are doing, and when they turn, we turn, and when the conditions change, then we know we can make some incremental changes ourselves. But we also have to be very attentive to the science and the projections and things. And I want to say not so much that we need to do this out of necessity, but I want to invite us, especially as Unitarian Universalists, to embrace this idea. And I happen to think we Unitarian Universalists have a good message here, and we have some experience that the world can benefit from in this, because as a religious movement, this is how we approach our spirituality. We don't have one specific deity in mind that everybody comes to accept. We don't have one specific way that you need to be spiritual, one specific spiritual practice. Instead, we trust and encourage everyone to follow what they feel is in their heart and in their spirit and where that's guiding us. And it is part of, it's being flexible in a way. And throughout our history, that's what has, one of the things that has defined us, that we don't take one piece of evidence, say the Bible, and then say, well, that's it, and that's how our worldview comes from that, and it's never going to change. Instead, we say, okay, we might start with that, but then we see there's new evidence that emerges in the world and the lives that we lead, and whether it comes from science or our own direct experience, new evidence says, okay, well, I'm going to change my worldview because of this new evidence. And so rather than having one lead to the other in a logical fashion, we are caught in this kind of endless circle that we develop a worldview, but then we get new evidence, and so we change our worldview, and then that leads to new experiences too. And it's a never-ending cycle, a never-ending spiral, I believe. And truth is somewhere in the middle, but we never totally get there, but we just work little bit by bit in coming closer to it. And so the ability to do that on a spiritual level as a religious community gives us strength to do that in our lives, to be able to look at the world around us and say, yeah, we don't know exactly what's going to happen when, but we're okay with that, and we believe that we can come to a better, broader, deeper truth if we continue to work in this spiral, continue to work and taking what we know and what we value, holding it dear, but opening our minds and our hearts to the evidence that is around us. It's probably particularly easy for somebody like me to say this because those of you who are familiar with Myers-Briggs type indicators may hear some of this as being familiar with the type, the P versus J dichotomy in the Myers-Briggs type indicators, and I happen to be on the P side of that continuum, which is perceiving, which generally means that I'm the kind of person who's more comfortable making things up as I go along rather than having things mapped out with a particular schedule. And I know that many of us are on very different places on that spectrum, and but that's within one particular psychological profile. But I embrace that ability that I've had in my life, and in fact it goes all the way back. There's a joke in my family, an old joke that when in about high school, I think, and my younger sister went through a phase where she's more of a J, by the way, and she went around and one day at dinner one day at breakfast on a Saturday, she asked everybody in the family what their plans were for the day, and she was writing it all down because my mom, I think, wanted to know, okay, what's everyone's plans today? And so she went and wrote it all down and whatnot, and she asked my brother and my dad and myself, I think it was the three of us, that what our plans were for the day, and she wrote down that my brother had a list of things like he was going to help wash the car and he was going to cut the grass, and my dad had a list of things like he was going to sweep the patio and blah blah blah, and she came down to me and it just said, Ken's plans, no plans. That's all I said. And my mom kept that little piece of paper and put it in a family scrapbook, and here it is, many decades later, and sometimes when we get together that still comes up in family jokes. Ken's plans, no plans. And so I'm kind of the one that's known that way. But I want to invite us to also feel, as Unitarian Universalists, that we are comfortable and embrace this uncertainty and being able to live and adapt our world. That we live according to a quote that I love by André Gide, which says, "Believe those who are seeking the truth, doubt those who find it." That, to me, encompasses what Unitarian Universalism is. Believe those who are seeking the truth and doubt those who find it. So I want us to revel in uncertainty, to celebrate the incredibly complex and ultimately baffling interdependent web of all existence, and just give up on whatever attempts we make to try to explain it all, to really embrace and love this interdependent web of all existence, to really embrace and love life. We have to do so with the humble admission that we love it precisely because we can't understand it all. Or as it was put famously by John Lennon in a song, life is what happens while you're busy making other plans. In summary, I just want to say that the word faith comes to mind here. Faith is not faith if it masquerades as certainty. Faith is those things that we believe and we act upon that we know we don't know. Faith is precisely that which we know is beyond our doubts and believe anyway, not because we know it's true, but because our faith gives life purpose and structure. Faith is doing the right things despite all the evidence to the contrary. So may we be strong, living our faith and bowing to the undeniable mystery that is not only the universe and everything around us, but also the very things we hold closely and dearly in our hearts. Thank you.